Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 119th chapter of Psalms. This chapter is by far the longest and largest in either testament. It is 176 verses. It is one massive acrostic maze, which an acrostic is a poetic device whereby the opening letter of each verse for 8 verses in a row are in the alphabetical order of the Hebrew alphabet, which consists of 22 vowels. So you add up and do the math. 22 times 8 brings you to 176. And the way we've been dividing them is doing them 2 stanzas at a time. So each 8 verses, the first letter that you read in Hebrew is consistently in that order from Aleph to Tau. That's their A to Z. And so in the most recent lesson, we did 17 through 32. This is the Hebrew letters of Gimel and Daleth, and we'll get to He and Wa. These are the 5th and 6th vowels of the 22-letter Hebrew alphabet. But before that, we're going to review the 3rd and 4th. So verse 17, 18, and 19, we're just going to read that chunk. Do good to your servant. Let me live, and I keep your words. Open my eyes that I might see wonders from your Torah. I am a sojourner in the earth. Do not hide your commandments from me. So we get the picture of who the psalmist is. He is a student, and he loves the law. He's motivated by the law. It's his deepest yearning and humblest desire and most exalted expectation. He is not only a teacher of the law, but this describes the joy of learning and living and growing with Elohim through his law. And the law is a special form of revelation. It would have been sacrosanct amongst the Old Testament Jews. In the New Testament, the appreciation for it sort of diminishes because the old forms cannot fit the new structures, but it is still useful. You cannot argue against the meditations and the musings of the psalmist or challenge the sincerity of his longing, his professed longing for it. Verses 23 through 24. Though princes sat speaking against me, your servant meditates on your law. Your witnesses are also my delight, my counselors. So this gives us a hint as to what his profession might have been. He might have been a priest, and as such, he would have had access to royalty, rulers, princes, and people of secular authority are referenced throughout this. Whoever he was, he had audiences with them, and even in the midst of being persecuted for his zealous adherence to the word, he found solace in refuge in meditating on the laws. So the Hebrew practice of meditation, we read that word most often in the book of Psalms than anywhere else, but it is a practice of the Judeo-Christian religion, but we approach meditation differently than the Hindu, Buddhist, and New Age people do. They pursue meditation as a conscious voiding exercise. We pursue it as a conscious enhancing exercise. But his source of pleasure and delight, even in pain, was his counselors. He lived by these. He abided by these advice. They gave him strength and direction to finish the race. This takes us to Daleth, the 4th letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Verse 27, make me understand the way of your orders, that I might meditate on your wonders. So the psalmist is a human, and the things of the Spirit cannot be known apart from the Spirit. So he's praying to the right place for the comprehension that he himself lacks. Our human faculties and reasonings can intellectually grasp the orders, but to meditate on his wonders is a whole nother arena of contemplative activity. But, the miracles are a witness, and the word is a miracle in itself from start to finish. So that is something we can meditate. We can meditate on the miracles we read of and the miracles we've experienced. Miracles are a lot more common than people generally tend to believe. Verse 29 through 32, remove me from the way of falsehood and grace me with your Torah. I have chosen the way of truth. Your just judgments I have held level. So he doesn't want the way of lie, the way of deceit, the way of just backstabbing and gossiping. That is the way of the world. He wants the truth, and he's willing to live for the truth and live in the truth, for the truth, and through the truth in the world that he inhabits, which is surrounded by lies, shortcuts, and deceptions. But Elohim's judgment is much more perfect than any implementation or execution of human justice on earth. So we can take refuge in that as we see the injustice in the world around us. I have clung to your witnesses, O Yahweh, do not put me to shame. I run the way of your commandments, and you enlarge my heart. So that word clung, the first time we read that, is in reference to Adam and Eve. They clung to each other. We are to be similarly wedded. The covenantal relationship of Israel is depicted in the analogy of a marriage with Israel as the bride and Yahweh as the bridegroom. So is the church. We are the bride of the Messiah, who is the bridegroom. But we are to cling to the law, the witnesses, everything we read in here, and we will not be put to shame. Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, and it is the power of salvation to the ends of the earth. I run the way of your commandments, for you enlarge my heart. So Yahweh is able to do something that no one else can. He's able to enlarge and expand our hearts to saturate on the riches of his meditations and his wonders. The things of the Spirit cannot be learned or known or understood or communicated apart from the Spirit. So you have to put on your eyes of faith to approach this. And we're going to take off from the 33rd verse. This is the fifth letter in the Hebrew alphabet, Hey. So every letter of every opening word we read of from verse 33 through 40 begins in the letter Hey in the Hebrew original. I'm not fluent in it, so we're just going to read it in English and expound on that. Teach me, O Yahweh, the way of your laws, and I observe it to the end. So his student, he had the attitude of being a perpetual student. He saw life as a school and Yahweh as the teacher, and he was blessed to know his ways, which enabled him to survive and flourish spiritually, even in the midst of persecution in the world. And he has the dedication and the lifelong resolve and persistence and endurance are necessary for us to observe to the end. For he who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. So we have to observe what we observe from Yahweh, his ways, his witnesses, his commandments, his judgments, what we read of in the law, essentially. And we have to observe it to the end, similarly, ideally. Make me understand that I might observe your Torah and guard it with all my heart. So in order for it to treasure it and guard it and protect it and preserve it at all hazard and health and cost, he has to understand it. For having the awareness of just how precious a gem it is, one can make the provisions for the resources accordingly. And but you have to understand in order to the understanding can only come from him. So he is the student, he is the teacher, apart from whom no capacity for learning, far less actual learning, can occur or take place. The things of the Spirit cannot be intuited or interpreted apart from the Spirit. So we have to get in tune with him, and there is no war between the law and the Spirit as is communicated by Paul in his 5th chapter in the book of Galatians. And make me walk in the path of your commandments, for I have delight in it. So the covenant path is considered as referenced as a way and a path. And in the New Testament terminology, we have the straight and narrow path to salvation. They are both a path with a destination. The covenant path of Israel was for temporal blessings and prosperity in exchange for obedience. They had a more simplistic system of rewards and punishments to stimulate their obedience, but the power of the problem is that human nature does not delight in the law. The psalmist was the exception rather than the rule, because the natural man resists and rebels to the impositions and the intervention that they can conflict with his conscience, just having these laws and the awarenesses is. So a lot of the people who hear the law, they reject it, but the ones who listen are the ones who love it, and they stay with it, and they are blessed immeasurably throughout this life and beyond. But there are no shortage of obstacles, shortcuts, and compromises, and broad is the path of narrow and destruction, which surrounds the straight and narrow way to salvation. incline my heart to your witnesses and not to greedy gain. So money itself is not the origin of evil, as is frequently recited on the colloquial level. It is the love of money. This much is communicated in 1 Timothy 6:10. So there's nothing wrong or sinful with money itself. There's nothing sinful in having a lot of it. If you prosper and you are honest, then that is not sinful. But the sin becomes when you start hoarding it and coveting it. Then you break the 10th commandment of the Decalogue, when you start loving money. And then money, you cannot serve Elohim and Mammon. This much is made plain by Matthew 6:24. So the way people, the entire world worships at the beck and call of money. They think of it, they lose sleep over it, they pray for more of it, they live for it, they acquire it. But if you fall in love with money itself, then you are doomed and you are lost. What profited a man to gain the entire world and lose his own soul? So money is a distraction, but the antidote, as communicated by the psalmist, is having a heart and a mind that gravitates towards the witnesses. The witnesses are what's written of him. These are witnesses, and these are revelatory tidbits of who his nature is, what he wills, what he wants for us, and what his character and behavior is. Turn away my eyes from looking at falsehood, and revive me in your way. So he repeats much of what he said in verse 29, remove me from the ways of falsehood. He says here, turn away my eyes from looking at falsehood. So our eyes have appetites, and they gravitate towards the things they desire. There are lust of the eyes, 1 John 2:16. If we're not careful, if we look at another woman with lust in our eyes, then we commit the moral equivalent of adultery, Matthew 5:28. So our eyes, we have to keep them on guard, and we have to fill it with things that are of the Spirit, and the law is certainly a spiritually enriching experience to study in mode of contemplation. So if you're looking, but the lies are all around you, the world itself is a giant lie, human society and the socioeconomic pecking order are in some sense just a fictitious facade. But, he can be revived in your way, not my way. The possessive indicator of the pronoun is significant. It's also capital letter yours. So this is his way, and this connects us, the path. We earlier spoke of the covenant path and the way. And the way that you can prosper on the covenant path is revealed in his witnesses and in his judgments and everything we read in the law. And it revives us from sin by exposing our sin. It cannot stimulate the heart that longs for obedience. All it can do is expose the sin nature and our need for salvation. So we don't want to mistake the law, the observance of it, as securing our salvation. It is still good and just to observe the law and to study it, but don't invest your salvation on it, because legalism is a dead-end trap. But that's getting away from what's communicated here. Establish your word to your servant, which leads to the reverence of you. So he considers himself a student and a servant. He has an inferior position to him, but he longs for his word to establish him, to set his direction, to set his course and motion in life. And he knows that his word leads to proper worship and respectful reverence of him. So his word is a reflection of him. If it's not exactly him itself, but it reveals who he is. Turn away my reproach which I dread, for your judgments are good. So the psalmist was evidently on the end of some persecutorial injustice in his life. This is referenced, not only implied here, but referenced throughout, but he does take solace and delight in the meditation of the law throughout his trials and tribulation. And reproach is just one of the consequences. It's part of the price of discipleship. We have to bear the reproach and ridicule of the entire world that is that we are trying to lead to the one who can save them, but it's one that we have to bear willingly. It's a pretty benign form of persecution, but one we have to embrace wholeheartedly. and his judgments are good is an understatement. His judgments are perfect. So even though the world around us, some even question the existence of God in a world where injustice is the normative procedure of the justice system and just everything else. But his heavenly justice is better than any human or earthly justice. See, I have longed for your orders. Revive me in your righteousness. So once more, it's not his righteousness. He wants to be revived in not his own righteousness. He knows that he cannot be revived in his own righteousness. So he says, revive me in your righteousness. Our righteousness is imputed to us. This procures our salvation when we appropriate the alien righteous of the Son who suffered for us. And we have to long, we have to yearn, we have to desire, we have to have an appetite and an intake and consumption of the ingestion of his orders, his directives, his commandments. What he tells us to do, we should do for our own benefit. And he only wants what's best for us. That's why he asks for a lot from us. This takes us to the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Wa, and this is verses 41 through 48. And let your kindness come to me, O Yahweh, your salvation according to your word. So his kindness is revealed in the promise of salvation, which is contained in his word. So this is a fantastic promise to cling to, and a humble hope and exalted expectation to grasp onto it. And it is all the product and rooted in and made manifest because of his kindness. Our salvation is not motivated by necessity. Our very lives in existence are neither motivated by necessity, but they are acts of kindness from a self-sufficient being who is perfectly satisfied in himself to extend the taste of experience to other life forms, the crowning one of which is us humans. But salvation is the great, in our spiritual warfare, Paul lists the items that we are to dress in the full armor of Elohim, and it's a head-to-toe thing. So that what protects the head is the helmet of salvation. And if you struggle with wandering thoughts, just focus your head on thoughts of salvation. Just pray out loud, thank you for saving me, and that will protect you from wandering thoughts. So that I answer my reprover, for I have trusted in your word. So we have to answer our reprover. There's going to be skeptics, there's going to be doubters, there's going to be naysayers, there's going to be secular antagonists who challenge us for the sin to answer for our faith. But if we trust in his word, then we are given the promise in the New Testament that we do not need to take any meditation when we are brought to witness before them, for the Ruach Kadesh will be imparted to us, and he will speak the words through us that will enable us to overcome the reprover and give a effective evangelistic testimony in the den of enemy territory. And do not take away from my mouth the word of truth entirely, for I have waited for your judgments. So he has an appetite for the word, he consumes it, he feasts upon it, and he doesn't want it removed from his mouth. He cannot say it out loud enough, and he wants the truth, start to finish, in its wholeness, in its totality. The truth, the word of truth entirely is the scripture start to finish, everything that it, and the word of truth is more extensive than scriptures alone. It connects to the incarnate one, who is the word in the flesh, and also the truth personified. But the psalmist aspiration is an exalted one for the word of truth in all its components, all its varieties, all its broad totality. And this is his humble waiting. He was patient for his judgments, and the ceding vengeance and judgment to Yahweh is the most faith-enhancing exercise we can do, because his judgment is slow, but that doesn't mean he is unconcerned with sin. It only means he will right all wrongs in the final analysis and in the ultimate end. that I might keep your Torah continually, forever and ever. So the element of endurance is clearly palpable in the psalmist. He is a lifelong love. He's a devotee and student and protege of Yahweh, who had instructed him through his law. He studied it diligently all day, every day, throughout the day. He studied it wholeheartedly, start to finish. He lived what he learned. And you have to keep the law continually. It's not enough to know the law. You have to keep it with your behavior and your actions. The law exists to guide and govern our behavior. But to keep it forever and ever, that will be happening in heaven one day, where there will be no sin and there will be no sorrow, because there is no sin, because our hearts and redeemed bodies will no longer have the sin, be contaminated by the sin nature. That I might walk in a broad place, for I have sought your orders. So he wants an abundant access to a broad place. He wants to be able to go wherever he wants to go without fear. But he's reminding him of the fact that he has sought his orders, so he's trusting him implicitly to provide him with the orders and a revelation of his will in the moment that he goes wherever he needs to go. That I might speak of your witnesses before kings and not be ashamed. So to speak of his witnesses before kings and not be ashamed, that's a pretty hefty order, but you cannot fault it for the righteousness of this request, to be able to stand in front of audiences of people with outstanding authority and to witness to Yahweh before them and not be ashamed, not be put to shame, only the meditation in the word, because persecution, rejection, and ridicule is going to be part of that job description. Not every king or person is going to like the message you have to say, and you cannot take that personally. They are not rejecting you. They are rejecting the one who you are speaking for and who is speaking through you. That I might delight myself in your commandments, which I have loved. So if you delight in it, you're pretty much going to love it. If you delight in it, that means you take pleasure and joy and satisfaction in performing the commandments, in learning them and living them and studying them and embodying them and just making them define who you are and what you do. So the love, obedience motivated by love is the standard that is established by the Savior in John 14:15 and 15:21. That is to be our motivation and incentive for obeying. We are not to obey out of fear, because a mature believer's sense of fear will exceed, sense of faith and love will exceed their sense of fear. So we should fear to break the law, but we should obey the law out of love. 48th and final verse, that I might lift up my hands to your commandments, which I have loved, while I meditate on your laws. So he has the attitude of praise. He wants to lift up his hands. This was the customary physical gesture with which one would offer praise in ritual song. They lifted up their hands. And this psalm is meant to be read and meditated as prose. It is not it is poetry, but it is not to be sung, as are most of them. This one is best read, the richness of this psalm cannot be sung, but is perhaps best read. And we contemplate and reflect and meditate on his meditatings and musings of the law, that we may study the law, which is not limited to his expression and declaration of his love for the law, but the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and it's a whole genre of Old Testament literature, and it informs and influences much of the writings. And the comparison between the book of Psalms and the first 5 books of Moses, they are both there are 5 books of Psalms, just like there's 5 books in the Pentateuch. That word is the Greek in origin, symboling 5, much like Pentateuch. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that's 5. There's also 5 books in the Psalms, and if the Pentateuch which informs this psalm, is Yahweh's message to man, then the book of Psalms is man's message to Yahweh, and they're both in 5 books. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.